Isn't it awesome that we're having a breakout on rural ministry? We were talking just a little bit ago about how many of you ever had the experience where you go to a conference and absolutely everything that you heard or were exposed to at the conference you had to contextualize because it's like there's no way we're ever going to be in that setting. Anybody ever had that kind of an experience? Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad that we're talking about rural ministry. To say that rural church planting has been overlooked in the past 50 years to the the urban and suburban church plants. It would not be an overstatement to say that it's the church planting efforts over the last 50 years have been to the exclusion of rural America. And sadly, what we found out in the last presidential election is that rural America is a lot bigger than people estimated. It's a lot more influential. And so that's our topic today is like, how can we reach into this overlooked sector of American culture and bring a fresh expression of the gospel there? Hi, Paul. Welcome.
I can find you. I know.
Come on. Good grief. So before we get started, there is a website up here on the board. And if you have the ability to go there, if you go to that website, there will be a download link to a document. It's a PDF document. And you'll be able to download that and have it on your phone for later use. But if you don't have the ability to download it now or would prefer a physical copy, it looks like I got 6 copies left. So if anybody wants them, help yourself. We'll be referring to those in just a moment. Okay. My name's Ty. I'm a pastor in Lusk, Wyoming. And if you view Wyoming, if this is Wyoming, a big square, I'm over here. Okay, we're on the route to the Black Hills. It is the town that I'm in is the county seat of the least populated county in the least populated state in America. That's our claim to fame. So the town that I'm in is a town of 1,200 people. But our entire county is only 2,200 or 2,300 people. So cattle outnumber people in our county 50 to 1. It's one of the largest cattle producing counties in America. And you say, well, why did you plant a church there? And to really get to the heart of the matter, you go back to a parable that Jesus told that he would leave the 99 in pursuit of how many who were lost? One. And the reality is that there's a lot more than one lost person in any one of our rural communities. But in my community, there hasn't been a fresh expression of the gospel there for decades. And what we're seeing is addiction, we're seeing broken marriages, we're seeing poverty, we're seeing all sorts of horrible things. And the question is, who's going to do something about that? Like, does God care about these people? Yes, of course he cares about it. And the call that I felt on my life was, who better to reach the people in Lusk, Wyoming than you? God asked me, who have I prepared better for Lusk than you? And the question was not, are there more qualified people? Yeah, there's better leaders, there's better communicators, there's better pastors than I am. But this is the place where I'm from. This is the place where my family's roots go deep. I grew up on a ranch that's been in my family for 107 years. And when I think about that in connection to this community, the doors that has opened are unique. And it's as if God was preparing Lusk, Wyoming, preparing us for this time in this place. And I imagine that you probably have some similar experiences in the small towns that you're a part of as well. So as we start, I want to play a little game. There will be a prize for the game. Okay. There are 3,007 counties in America. I'm going to ask you a question, and without Googling on your phone, I mean, everybody's got to play for real here. You're just going to take a legitimate guess. And you need to write down your guess on a piece of paper so we have some concrete evidence here, okay? Here's the question. Half of America's population lives in how many counties? There's 3,007 counties in America. Half of America's population lives in how many counties? Write down your answer. You have just a minute or so to do that. Just write down your guess. So everybody understands the question. There's 3,007 counties in America. Half of America's population lives in how many counties? Write down your guess. If anybody needs a pen or something, just holler and we'll pass you one. Okay. Now, we're going to give away, I'm going to give away a book, copy of a book called Small Town Jesus by Donnie Griggs, to the person that has the closest answer. All right? Are you ready for the answer? Half of America's population lives in 146 counties. Okay? Anybody get close to your answer that you wrote down? 200? Anybody closer than 200? 100? So technically you're closer, right? Yeah. Anybody closer than that? Good job, man. Hey. There's a good book. You know what we won't have? Okay. Now, since obviously he has a better understanding of rural America than some others, somebody else needs a book for the furthest off. Okay, who was the furthest off? 15? Okay. 12?
I put 3.
3? Can anybody beat 3?
That's what I'm talking
All right. Right on.
I'm from San Bernardino, so that's like the biggest county in like the world. So.
Yeah.
It's huge. San Bernardino, California. It's one of the biggest counties.
It's crazy.
No.
So I just sat through the in this room in the previous session. It was all about urban evangelism. And when you think about urban evangelism, you think about the number of people. Half of America lives in 146 counties. That tells us a couple things. That tells us that urban centers are huge, right? But it also tells us that rural America is huge. I want you to look at that document that you downloaded. If you haven't already, here's this website. You can go there. You can download a PDF version of this. If you need a print version, there's one up on this chair. There's a map on the front behind the title. It's a county map of the United States of America. And it has in those dark blue colors, those dark blue highlighted counties are the 146 counties where half of America's population lives. So when you look at that, you get a visual representation of what? A huge expanse of America. Now, when we think about rural America, we think about these others that are not in this 146. There's some mistakes, especially when it comes to evangelism. There's some mistakes that people make. I want to talk about these. They're on your handout. We'll buzz through them quickly. The first mistake that people make in evangelism in rural America, mistake number 1, is assuming that there aren't any people in rural America. That's a huge mistake. In his book, Small Town Jesus, that these guys just got, Donnie Griggs points out that if you define rural America as towns of 20,000 or less, that there's 33.7 million people that live in rural America. Just let that sink in for a minute. That these places that you drive through that are overlooked, that are not destination locations, that for the most part our church planting efforts have just moved past. 33.7 million people live in those places. And so if we say that rural America there's not enough people in rural America to reach them, rural America is larger than about 150 other countries around the world. 33.7 million people in rural America, that's bigger than the population of Afghanistan. right? It's bigger than the population of the Philippines, countries where you probably have missionaries, boots on the ground. We send missionaries to these countries and we say, well, we aren't reaching rural America because there's no people there. No, there's a lot of people. In fact, rural America is bigger than most countries in the world. So we can't use that excuse anymore. We can't say, well, there's just not enough people there to reach them. Do we need churches in the 146 counties where half of America's population lives? Yes. The answer is yes. In fact, we need more churches there. There's lost people there too, but not to the exclusion of the 33.7 million people that live in rural America. Can we agree on that right off the bat? It's a mistake that has been made too long, and it's an excuse that's been used far too long, that there's no people in rural America, and it's simply not true. We have to get past that. Mistake number 2 is this, that we're just going to assume that rural America is already reached with the gospel. There's a lot of people that believe this, that, oh, if you get outside of the city and you get into the country areas, those are the good old boys, and so they still hold to the Christian values that our country was based on. They're all white Republicans, and so they're all saved anyway. Well, that's just simply not the truth. You probably are familiar with this quote from D.A. Carson. He said, one generation believes the gospel, the second generation assumes the gospel, and the third generation denies the gospel. Once upon a time, Christian values were the basis of our country, and rural America represented the majority of what America was. It was farmland. It was cattle country. That's what America was made of, and Christian values were a core of that. But 2 generations ago, while they may have believed the gospel, the next generation assumes the gospel, and guess what? We're in the 3rd generation now that has denied the gospel. And in these rural places across our country, many of them, the last church planting efforts that were made there have been a generation ago, many 2 generations ago. It's time for a fresh move of the gospel. The 3rd mistake is this, and this is not specific to rural. I think this is a mistake that often gets made, but I think it's prevalent in rural communities, and that is viewing evangelism as an event and not a journey. You want to picture this as a pendulum. That's one side of the pendulum, and the other side of the pendulum is viewing evangelism as only a journey and not an event. And you understand the dangers in both of these, right? So a way that you can think about this is, and I did not come up with this, I honestly can't get credit I don't know who originated this or where I even heard it. The difference between hunting versus fishing, right? Hunting is aggressive, fishing is gentle. Hunting is one size fits all, where fishing is multifaceted. Different approaches, different ways of doing it. Hunting, if you miss the target in hunting, if you aren't successful hunting, what happens? The animal runs away. If you aren't successful in fishing, what do? You cast again, or you put on a different type of bait, you throw it back in there again. Okay? So in the one danger, it's viewing evangelism as only an event. So this approach. This is the shoving the 4 spiritual laws in somebody's face. This is knocking on someone's door and not saying hi or how are you. It's if you were to die today, do you know where you would go? Viewing evangelism as only an event. The only thing that I'm concerned about is getting a person to cross the line of faith. Do people come to faith through that approach? Yes, the Spirit of the Lord is sovereign, and he can even use flawed methods to bring people to himself. But are we to model that? Is that the approach that we should base our evangelism efforts off of? I would say no. On the other hand, there's always a swing to that pendulum, and the other swing is that evangelism is only about the journey and not about an event. So this is the danger of, well, we just want to walk alongside people and we just want to love them and we just want to do life with them. Well, great. To what end? And what's your goal in that? Just to walk life with them, or are you trying to get them to cross the line of faith, to put their trust in Jesus? And so I think they're in retaliation to the kind of in-your-face hunting type of an approach. There was a swing of the pendulum to where it's all about just walking alongside people, but never actually calling them to trust Christ as their Savior. And when we do that, and when we model that, we're doing people a disservice because we're missing the finish line. Like all of it is leading, our journeying with people, while that's great, should be leading them to a place where they're going to put their trust in Jesus, right? A fourth mistake is this: not having a diversified evangelism portfolio. Let me explain what I mean by that. I mean, not having ways to interact and engage with people at different places on their spiritual journey. So, for example, we can get caught into the mindset that the only place where people are going to hear the gospel is in our church services. It's great that you're preaching the gospel in your church services, but are unsaved people coming to your church services? And what about the person that's not ready to walk through the doors of your church? What about the person that doesn't even know that there's a God yet? That doesn't even believe that there's a God that loves them yet? So we need to make sure that we don't just put all of our evangelism eggs in one basket, but that we have a diversified evangelism portfolio. So you think about 1 Corinthians 9 as an example, where the Apostle Paul said, I've become all things to all people so that I might win some, right? This is the idea of, and Scott talked about that this morning, that there is a sense that we need to understand that not everyone's going to be in the same place, and that it may require us to enter into their world and even change our methods so that we can have the opportunity to win them to Christ. In the Bible, you see this through Jesus' teachings. He taught in parables at times. Not all the time. At times. Sometimes he taught to large crowds. Sometimes he taught to one person. Sometimes he walked with people on a journey. Sometimes it was a event. Sometimes it was through miracles. Sometimes it was through hospitality. But there was different means by which he was engaging people so that they might know the truth. Mistake number 5 is this: not allowing people to belong before they believe. Not allowing people to belong before they believe. See, the old model, the old process was that once a person trusts Christ, they believe, then they can get their life straightened out. They can quit smoking, they can quit drinking, they can quit gambling, whatever their issue was. Then they can belong to the church. So the old model was believe, become, belong. I want to suggest, and this is not new to many of you, this is not unique to me. The new process is that some people need to belong before they believe, which leads to them becoming. So the new model is belong, believe, become. And we've seen this to be true in our community as well. That people need to have a sense that they're connected, that they're loved, that you've heard it said this way, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's true. It's true. People want to feel that sense of belonging. They want to see Christian community work. They want to see what it means for Christ to make a difference in a person's life, which leads to them trusting Christ for themselves. And then it's a process of getting their issues taken care of. There's not a prerequisite to get all your issues taken care of before you can belong. Okay, number 6 is this: assuming that even committed church people are practicing evangelism. I think as pastors, we can become guilty of just assuming that even our committed people are practicing evangelism, when in reality, most people, statistically speaking, have never shared their faith. And you think about reasons why. We could all come up with reasons why. Some of them, it's out of fear. Some of them, it's out of, I didn't even know I was supposed to be doing that. But a lot of them just don't have the tools to do that, right? They don't have the tools to do that. I think some mistakes that we make are that we aren't praying for it. That we pray for a lot of things, but are we really praying that God is going to be rescuing lost people? Or are we just assuming that that's going to happen? What would happen if we changed the language of what we're praying for and specifically prayed that God would rescue lost people? Let me, we're a portable church. We launched in September of 2015, so we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary. We meet at a high school auditorium, and every Sunday morning we have our trailer. We back up to the door, we unload everything, we set it up. You guys know what this is like, right? And after we set everything up, before our worship team rehearses and all that kind of stuff, we just gather together as a core team and we pray. And I was convicted of what we were praying for. We took a lot of prayer requests about Aunt Ethel going in to have knee surgery and, such and such. And, those things are good to pray for. But when I noticed that our people weren't actively asking to pray for the lost people that were in their lives to find Jesus, it's like we're missing the mark. When we're spending more time praying for Aunt Ethel and her knee surgery than we are for lost people to be found, something's missing here. Like, we need to model that. We need to change that. So I was frank with people. I said, you know what, Jesus loves Aunt Ethel, but he didn't come so that Aunt Ethel could walk better. He came to seek and to save the lost. This is something we got to lead the way and beg the Lord that he's actually going to rescue lost people. We need to model it. Okay, so pray for it. We need to model it. What do I mean by that? If I'm not personally investing in lost people, if I'm not personally developing relationships with unsaved people, how could I ever expect my people to do that? As the leader goes, so everyone else goes. And so not only are we teaching our people and leading our people to pray for lost people, we're also modeling that. And I need to be intentionally asking myself often, who are the people that I'm investing in? Who are the people that I am actively trying to share my faith with? A third thing is this, that we need to teach it. And by this, I mean practically. We need to teach people the art of sharing their faith. I imagine that all of us would be shocked if we actually knew the percentages of people in our congregations that had the tools to share their faith with someone, to lead someone to Christ. And you say, well, that they should know how to do that. They've been coming to our church for a long time, and they've heard me present the gospel so many times. I think we would all be shocked if we understood the number of people that just don't have that tool in their toolbox. I don't think it's rocket science. I think that we need to have classes. We need to coach people. Maybe your context is going to be one-on-one with your leadership people. Maybe it's going to be having an event, an evangelism training event, and you try and get as many people there as you can. I don't know what your way to do it is, but we need to teach people how to share their faith so that they have that tool in their toolbox. And fourthly is this: we need to celebrate it. When we see it happen, when we see someone sharing their faith, we need to celebrate that. We need to hold that up in front of our people and say, hey, you know what? This is exactly what we're asking you to do. This is what we want to see you do. It's been said that what we celebrate gets repeated, right? What we celebrate gets repeated. And so we want to celebrate evangelism when it happens, even if it's not like crossing the line of faith, even if it's just helping a skeptic get over one of their issues about Christianity. That's a win. So we think about evangelism in terms of a process, okay, where you've heard this. What was the guy's name that the Engel Scale? You've heard of this. There was I can't remember his first name, but the Engel Scale was this. I think it was like -6 to +6, and they're the different stages of a person coming to faith from being like a complete skeptic or an atheist to being a fully devoted follower of Christ. This has been redone several times. In fact, who's the Converge guy, Paul, that does the spiritual? Gary Rohrmeyer has the spiritual journey deal. And so when we think about evangelism, you know, in a lot of people's mind, it's only this step, a person who trusts Christ. We need to rethink and celebrate with our people any movement towards Christ. So a person who has a conversation with a neighbor about spiritual things, that's something to celebrate, because that's a step in that person's spiritual journey. Like, this is significant stuff that we need to celebrate. We need to pray for. We need to model, and we need to teach. So I know these aren't the only mistakes, but I want to just pause here for a minute and get your guys' feedback on this. What are you seeing in your contexts? Do you see these things playing, and if so, which ones? How is this resonating with you? Any feedback at this point? What are you thinking?
Okay. They didn't have coffee out there, so it's.
Well, the second point you make, mistake, we discovered that this year doing a study of our town of 1,300. We have to border 3 counties, and we discovered in the last census, about 4,000 plus people identified as not being affiliated with any type of church.
There you go. So yeah, he just said that as they identified their county and looked at the data, they maybe probably assumed that less people were unreached with the gospel, but what you discovered was actually that 4,000 people were lost. That's significant. Now, were you using the ARDA.com? Do you know?
We hired a Brown church development to do
Okay.
this, and that was just part of their study for us.
Perfect.
I'm not sure what they used.
Okay. I'll have you write down a website if you aren't familiar with it. It's called the ARDA, ARDA, which stands for the Association of Religious Data Archives.com. TheARDA.com. And what it is it's a national county by county survey that's taken every 10 years along with the U.S. Census. And what you can do is you can go to this website, type in the name of your county, and it will give you the religious data on that county in all sorts of different formats. But when you go there and you type in your county, the first thing you will see is a bar graph. And on the far right-hand side of that bar graph is a bar that says unclaimed. Unclaimed. I think that's the name of it, what they call it. And anyway, that represents the people that are not affiliated with any religion of any type, and it puts a number there. I would encourage you to go and check that out and see what it is for your county, but chances are it's a lot higher than most people would think. Any other feedback?
This very much resonates with us as we were talking before the session a little bit. We were on staff at a church that I come from this small community, and what I realized was we as a church what we were just bent towards was if we could just get these people to walk through our doors, and we gave out these cards, did you make a commitment today? And the truth was, some of these events were major successes in our eyes at first, and then, I don't know, we started to realize these people are leaving our church now. We have absolutely no connection, and we started to look at the values of our community and realize this community values relationships. Our people's dinner tables are the best altars that we have around here. And we just started realizing that, kind of with the analogy of hunting and fishing, I really like that. We were going for these one shot, we got one opportunity here, but realizing, no, we've got other tools that we can use here, but we don't feel like they're being tapped into that well. So our journey, our plant is just under a year old, and we are in that process of trying to get people to think through. There's several different methods, and quite honestly, our own community is telling us what they value.
Yes.
So why not tap into that rather than trying to add something to it?
Yeah, and going back to that fishing hunting thing, wherever the person is along this scale, wherever they're at, whatever their issue is, there's different opportunities that can specifically target that person. And so coming to church is a step in the process. Where it's at on the step, I don't know. But it is a step in the process. But if it's the only step in the process, then we're missing opportunities to reach people who aren't there yet, who aren't ready to take that step. Makes sense, yeah. Any other feedback, any other mistakes that you see made in rural evangelism? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I'm learning these days about evangelism, and having seen it a little bit overseas with the Timothy Initiative in Nepal, and just their level of accountability and dependency on the Holy Spirit. And so I'm joining with a group in Minneapolis to try to live that out in our lives a little bit better. And I'm initially doing it, and it helps. The accountability and Holy Spirit, lead us to the person of peace, those kinds of prayers, that's been helpful.
That's awesome. So, I mean, I think what he just said is huge, the importance of accountability and prayer in the process. That's great. It's kind of like when we, I spent years in youth ministry, and you guys know this, that peer pressure can work in negative ways, but peer pressure can also work in positive ways. Same thing is true in churches, man. If there's a expectation that we're sharing our faith, like that's a good thing. That's a good peer pressure to have, and it drives us all forward, and it helps us all to get better at this. Yeah. Any other comments, questions at this time?
Feels that some of these mistakes are not necessarily unique to rural America. I'm thinking, 2 through 6 definitely feel like they can apply in other contexts, like suburban and even some of the more homogeneous cities. So I'm just wondering if you have other things that are unique to rural America.
Yeah. What he suggested is that not all of these are unique to rural America, and he's absolutely right. At the previous session, I sat in on the urban evangelism workshop, and you're exactly right. And I think the reason is because that we, whether a person is urban or rural, they're a person, and we're trying to reach lost people. And so, in essence, like there's a lot of carryover when it comes to specific challenges and stuff from rural. Yes, we do have some very specific things in this document. I'll just tell you about it briefly. Over the last year, I've had the privilege of working with these 4 guys: Jason Ricks, who is a pastor in Laramie, Wyoming; Joshua Saros, who's a pastor in Bailey, Colorado; and Dan DeBryan, who's a pastor in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. And the idea of our meeting, we met twice a month via a Zoom call over the last year to ask the question, how can we see more churches planted in rural America? And it really honestly has been a joy of mine to learn from these great leaders and these great thinkers. And what we're discovering is that the best people to plant in rural America are people from rural America, right? To where we think it actually can cut off, if a person is from the area that they're planting in, that it can cut off as much as 5 years of an on-ramp into that community, because they understand the community, they understand the culture, they have name recognition, they have just connections that it can take someone that's just parachuting in maybe as much as 5 years to not feel like an outsider. And so if that's true, that the best people to plant new churches in rural communities are people from those rural communities, then we have a leadership development problem, don't we? We have a group of young people who need to hear that you don't have to go to the city to make a difference for God with your life. That in fact, who better is wired for this place that you grew up, this podunk town that you don't see any opportunity? Who else is better wired than you are to reach that community? I mean, I think that's a challenge and a huge hurdle where we're at in terms of reaching rural America, is that the best people to reach it are graduating from high school never to return and leaving and getting sucked into, whether it's driven by opportunity or whether it's driven by finances or whether it's driven by a pursuit of success or a pursuit of notoriety. I don't know what drives it, probably a combination of all of those things. But if our best and our brightest are leaving, then we have a problem, don't we? What would it look like to start identifying the young leaders in your church? And by young leaders, I'm not talking about 20-somethings. I'm talking about junior high students. What would it look like to start identifying junior high students who you can identify leadership giftings in, that you can already see the way that God's wiring them and gifting them, and begin to plant seeds in their minds that think about what God could do with your life to change this community? What would it look like instead of, I've got 3 daughters, and my oldest daughter will be a freshman in high school this next year, which, pray for me. That's scary. Throughout their middle school career, at least once a year, all of the girls from the middle school would get on a bus and go 90 miles to our nearest city, if you will, Casper, and to the university. The university would put on this big event of women in science. And the whole event is planting seeds in these middle school girls' mind of what they could do with their life. You could be a nurse someday. God could use you to be an X-ray technician. God could use you to be or they aren't saying God, you know what I'm saying. You could use your life to be in botany, or you could use your life to be in science or whatever. What would happen if we were planting those kinds of seeds in our young people of how God could uniquely use them to do what no one else could do better because of their connection to the community and the culture? That was really challenging to me as we went through this, of saying, I need to have 2 or 3, 4 junior high kids that I'm investing in intentionally and planting these seeds of how the Lord can use them, and see how that might turn out. I'm not going to go through all of this document. Basically what we would do is we would ask some questions. We would see what research is out there, see what people were doing elsewhere, see what was working in terms of rural church planting across the country, and bring back our findings, summarize them here. The questions really start with, why do we need to plant churches? I mean, like super basic in terms of, is that the answer? And what we discovered, what we said is, there is not a problem that rural America faces that cannot be radically changed by the gospel. You think about the brokenness, you think about drugs, you think about the opioid epidemic. Those of you that are in rural communities, are you being affected by the opioid epidemic? it's unbelievable, right? Especially on the East Coast. I think it's even worse on the East Coast than it is where we're at. Yeah.
Oh man, I think in a small town, there's an assumption that everyone knows everyone.
Yes.
And they talk about that even, and I agree with the 5-year. I moved to a smaller town as before I was in ministry, and then since being in ministry, and that 5 years is about true. But one thing people say is, you know, that we know everyone. Usually they mean they know everyone who is anyone, but they'll also complain about new people that come in they don't really know. And they realize, you know, like, it isn't reach. There's a lot of conversations that could happen. There's a lot of, and like you said, the problems with addiction. I mean, our county in northern Michigan was an easy place to hide in a meth lab.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of policemen to find one. So,
Yep.
you know, and we just didn't have those, you know, law enforcement people. So they had to cooperate to try and, you know, break some of them up. But as a result, there's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of, and even though, I mean, kids that my kids went to school with knew, you know, who smoked pot and who had access to stuff, even
Yep.
though they weren't anywhere close to it. But it was just kind of this assumption that we know people, but we don't know people.
Yep.
And we know enough to know that we don't know them, and they have problems that
Yeah.
that the gospel can.
That's exactly right. You know, I think about the underage drinking problem in our town. It's just crazy, and I think a lot of that's driven because there's nothing else to do for kids. So the only thing that they do, and you know, to have fun is just go and hop in the back of some guy's pickup truck and go out someplace and get a 12-pack and knock them back. You know, you think of suicide rates. I mean, when you look at national averages for suicide rates, rural communities often have higher suicide rates. When you think about broken families, there's some weird stigma that a lot of people have, and that is that rural America is all these old-fashioned family values and that kind of thing. Not where I'm from, at least. I mean, like, it's rare to find somebody that their parents are still together. You know, like that's rare. Broken families, and so you think about all of these things that we've just mentioned: drugs and alcohol and teenage pregnancy and suicide and all of this kind. Is there a problem? Excuse me, that rural America faces that cannot be radically changed by the gospel? No. It works. It really does change people's lives. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, to complicate all of the drugs and alcohol and everything like that, I think they've done studies that have found that counselors move to the urban centers and they leave rural America. So there's no real solid counseling available to all these people, and that's where the church could step into that void and really provide a solid help to the community just by some good Christian biblical counseling.
That's right.
Available.
Rehab centers, addiction support groups and such. Marriage counseling is huge. Like, we're both really excited and devastated. We've got a couple from our church that is our first missionaries that we're sending out, and they're going on full-time missionary status with Family Life as marriage and family counselors. And while we're super excited about that, I mean, we're 3 years in and we're sending out our first missionaries. That's awesome. Hooray, hooray. I'm thinking, who am I going to send all of these broken marriages to go for counseling? Like, they're my go-to people and I would imagine that if it's not once a week, it's several times a month that I have referrals to them of marriages that need help working through different issues. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So as you suggest, if people come through college and they get a counseling degree, or they get in a social services type of opportunity, they aren't looking to come to rural America because they aren't going to make any money there. They're looking to go to the urban and suburban centers, and that really leaves us in a tough place. Yeah.
I think part of that perpetual problem being, you know, born and raised in such a rural context, when you don't have the resources in your own hometown that you have to reach out to, the answer is always leave here
Yes.
to go find the answer.
Yeah.
And so right now our church, we're teaming up with a ministry that's really attacking the human trafficking rate in Delaware, and it's amazing to see it happening. But the reason this ministry is starting to get so much traction is they're like, why are we having to send everybody away? we can't help anybody here.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. We think the gospel has an answer to that. But I know all of my friends growing up, oh, I can't wait to get out of Greenwood.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I kind of like Greenwood. So,
Yeah.
but we just don't have the resources that they have elsewhere.
Yeah. And we need more Kevins who are going to say, I'm not going to leave these people. I'm not going to run out of here and watch these people go to hell. God's placed me here. Nobody can do it better. He's wired me in such a way, given me this opportunity. Not on my watch. I'm going to do what I can. It's good. So that's the depressing things about rural America.
Can I just say something too, though?
Please.
And I think, this provides a great opportunity that we're talking about, but honestly, at a certain extent, I hope I don't offend too many people here, but I think the pastor is relegated to the professional leadership counseling.
Yep.
And we've licensed it, but we didn't have the authority in the first place. And I think that we've lost the art of counseling, of pastoring, and bringing that back down a level and connecting with people, and developing a community within the church that can minister
Yes.
the gospel in all forms of those needs, because the gospel has the answers.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. That's absolutely right. That people need to understand that it doesn't take a degree hanging on the wall for you to help walk along somebody through a difficult situation. It's absolutely right.
Stop it.
Stop it. Yeah. You guys seen that? Yeah. Just stop it, or I'll bury you in a box. Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, let's get to some positives, shall we? I don't know about you, but even driving from the airport here or driving from my town to the airport, I was so glad that I don't live in a city. Anybody else that way? Like, come on. This is the real session. Can we say, aren't you glad you don't live here? I mean, good grief. It's fun to come visit, and it's fun to, walk down have all these options. We've got one fast food restaurant in our county. That's not a joke, and it's Subway. Yeah. And so when we first came, Paul said, what do you want to eat? And I said, I absolutely do not care, just not Subway. I mean, I don't care. It's fun to visit for some of those different reasons, but I am certainly glad that I don't live there. And when it comes to the idea of pastoring, I am so glad that I get to pastor where I do. God's put me in the perfect place, and I hope that you feel that same way. There's some really unique, awesome things about rural communities, and I think they're worth reaching. And I think we need to consider how we can pour fuel on that fire. We're going to talk about 10 creative ways to reach your rural community. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. Some of these are going to be like, yeah, that's not news to me, and that's fine. But I want to, as we talked with different rural church planters across the country, we recognized that some of them are doing some really creative things that are actually working in their town, and maybe there might be some things that you can draw from this and be like, yeah, we could put that to work. And that might be part of, you remember we said a mistake is not having a diversified evangelism portfolio. This might be one of those things that you can bring back to your team and be like, hey, what would it look like if we were to do something like this in our town, okay? So like I said, we may not get to all of these, and that's okay, because in this document that you downloaded, again, I have extra copies up here if you need them. They're in there with descriptions of what they are and how people are actually putting them to work, okay? If you have questions as we go through them, or if I go too fast, tell me to slow down, and that'll be fine. Number one is this: no second-time guest left behind. No second-time guest left behind. What do I mean by that? We love first-time guests. First-time guests are awesome. We want more first-time guests, but you know what's even better than a first-time guest? A second-time guest. Why? Because that means that they enjoyed their first experience. That means that they were picking up what you were putting down, So how do you do this? I would say that this is the number one thing, the number one way that we have seen our evangelism statistic, if you will, go up and to the right, is by implementing this very first one: no second-time guests left behind. Why do you say that? So here, when we started, I came from a a church background of the church that I was in previous to the one that I was at was more class driven. Maybe some of you are familiar with this idea that what we want to do is we want to get people to come to this church, and then we want to get them to go through these series of discipleship classes. And the first one's kind of like an introduction to the church and what we're all about and that kind of thing. And so that was my paradigm of how to incorporate people into the church. And so when we launched, that was like our whole strategy. Let's just get people when they come. Then we want them to take their next step. And what is that next step? To come to 101 class. You know how many people we ever had to come to 101 class? 4. Why? Massive? You're like, yeah, that's way more than we had. Yeah. And the next time we had it, it was like one person signed up. It was like, what are we missing here? Well, we were trying to address a problem with the wrong tool. So what we ended up doing was, well, what happens if instead of like inviting these people to sign up for a class and then to come and to sit with other people and that kind of thing, what happens if we just invited them personally to come over for dinner? And so we started doing that, and here's what we discovered. No one has ever turned us down for a dinner invitation. No one. So we went from like a pathetic response rate to a 100% response rate just by tweaking the method that we were trying to engage with people. And guess what? In a class situation, it's awkward. People don't feel comfortable asking their questions. You don't get to know people on an individual level. Whereas if you invite them to your house and you sit down for dinner, it's an incredible opportunity to tell them, this is what we're about, this is why we're here, but we want to, more than that, know you and know where you're from and know what's going on in your life and how we can pray for you. And it never fails, because after dinner, the ladies will like go off and they're doing dishes or whatever, and the guys take a cup of coffee and go sit in, and the conversation goes deeper, faster. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just incredible what happens. And so I don't know if you guys have any other suggestions on how you're connecting with people. This is a tool that worked for us. It may work for you. But basically what we said is every time that we recognize that a person is a second-time visitor, how do we do that? Because we don't have many people in our church. I mean, it's not hard. We have our eyes open for them. When they come the first time, we introduce ourselves, we know who they are. But when they come back, it's like they're getting an invitation. That's how we do it.
It's our leaders too. I do it, and also our leaders do it.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, it doesn't have to just be the pastor. I think there is something special about that. I think it's good, but it doesn't have to be just the pastor. Have your leaders do this too. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that one?
I think the statistic is that great churches with retention keep about 1/4 of their first-time guests and about 3/4 of their second-time guests. Because first time around, people may have made a mistake. They may have shown up and said, oh man, this is not for us at all. But if they come back a second time, they've said, I like what I see here. I want to be a part of this. And really, it's the church's job then to just welcome them in and get them involved. So
That's good. That's good.
You used to give out Starbucks cards and things.
Yeah, we give out Starbucks cards. It's 90 miles to the nearest Starbucks. That's not a joke. It's 90 miles to the nearest Starbucks from our house. All right. Number 2 is this. Make the news with something. Make the news with something. He said, well, I thought this was an evangelism class. Remember, not everything is about this step of evangelism. That there's all sorts of mindsets that we have to overcome before a person's even in a place. You know, in the biblical language, there's a lot of soil that needs tilled before the seed is planted, right? And one of the mindsets that you have to overcome in a rural community that's prevalent is that they already know what the church is and what they're about. And their mindset is already made up about the church. And they think it's boring. They think it's full of old people. They think that they just gather together and pool their money together so that they can be comfortable until they die, so that the pastor will preach and say good things about them at their funeral. That's their mindset about what church is. And so in some ways, what we have to do is this idea of pre-evangelism, like breaking down the misconceptions that people have about church, have about Christianity. Like, that's important. So you say, well, make the news with something. How is that evangelism? It's destroying or attacking those mindsets that people have made up about the church and trying to give them a picture of really what we're all about. So some examples of this. One community that we looked at does a Project One, which is a one-day serving event, and people from the church nominate others in the community that could use a project done, fixing up a deck, painting the house, those kinds of things. They nominate them. The donations come in for materials and supplies and that kind of thing, and then all of the church volunteers and is broke up into teams to go and do those projects. This is something that if you contact your local newspaper or whatever your local source of information is, and tell them what you're doing, put out a press release on it or whatever, they're going to come and take pictures of this. Like a significant number of people serving in the community, they're going to come and take pictures of that. It's going to be in the newspaper, and people are going to see you serving and have the opportunity to say, why are you doing that? Because Jesus served us. It's a breaking down that barrier. You think about Easter outreaches with giant egg drops. People do this in different communities where they drop 10,000 eggs from a helicopter or whatever it is and gather people. What's the purpose of that? A church putting on an event for the community where the kids are having fun. Trunk or treats, concerts, kids carnivals. Another one that we found was really interesting is an idea of raking the town. Some of you live in a town where if you pull together your people in the fall when all the leaves fall off the trees and everybody has a huge mess in their yard, what would it look like for your church just to go rake the entire town and do it as a way to serve the community? And it's going to be something that makes the news so that you can put your best foot forward in terms of what it looks like to be the church. Any other ideas that come to mind when I talk about make the news with something?
Small towns sometimes have grant money and they're trying to do things that are community oriented and oftentimes contacting the development people or something, saying, well, how can we help? If the church shows up in force to something the community is doing, that's always a newsmaker. It's always, and the whole town knows that people from your church will like the town. We like the town. We want to help the town. We want to bless people.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Engaged in something at the school. When I was a family pastor in a rural community, I took pictures, and I take 300 to 1,000 pictures and post them on Facebook. So every parent had pictures. When I went to the new place, they have a prom grand march, and they have jamboree taking pictures so that the thousand people in this community could have pictures of their grandchildren. Just little things like that.
That's huge. That's huge. So press pause just for a second. I'm just going to point out that what he mentioned is number 10. We'll just piggyback on that real quick so you can fill in some blanks while we talk about these things. Go all in on building a bridge. Go all in on building a bridge. And basically what that means is that if you consider the church to be an island and you want your community to come to your island, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to build bridges to the mainland so that people can get to you. How do people connect with your church? His example was a great one. There's others, things like special needs prom. You've seen this with Tim Tebow has his big initiative. What would that look like for your church to be the ones who put together a special needs prom for the special needs kids? After school homework clubs, movies in the park, computer workshops, senior center singing, hymn singing, homeschool group, bless a business. This was an idea that came out of a small community where they just said, all of our people are in town. This was a ranching community. All of our people come to town to go to church. What would it look like if we encouraged all of our people instead of going home for lunch, everyone just go to the local diner for lunch? What would that do? And the local diner owner said that it like tripled their weekly income for that particular day of people just going there and having lunch. Now that's an easy thing to ask people to do. Who doesn't want to have Sunday lunch? And if we can do that as a ministry, as a mission, a way to build bridges to the community, and then the business owner knows, hey, the church isn't all about getting things from me. They're blessing me. Like, they just sent all their people to come have lunch at my restaurant. How cool is that? Teacher appreciation gifts. That was something that we did this year. Was we got a list from the administrative office of all of the teachers in the school district, and we sent all of them an appreciation gift, hand delivered them, told them thank you for what they were doing. And we did that about 6 weeks before school got out, when they're just like done, crispy. That's a great idea. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to build on your business idea there. We've done something very similar, but we actually approached them with, what can we do for you?
Yeah.
So every month we do, acts of kindness. Our groups does it. We do it formally, and every single business that we walked into was shocked at the fact that because normally people do it with nonprofit groups or government organizations, and we've actually had a couple of businesses take up that offer.
That's
we
great.
did mulch for one of them, some landscaping, and then the word got around that we consider them part of the community.
That's awesome.
So things like that would definitely help.
That's great. Just that you would ask that question, how can we serve you?
That you got nothing, you have no other agenda other than to be a community guy.
That's right. Your suggestion earlier is number 3, to get schooled. That if your church isn't connected and serving your local schools, you're missing a huge opportunity, because we all know that, like, the school in a rural community is the center of everything. Everybody shows up for the football games, and everybody shows up for the events and that kind of thing. And if that really is the heartbeat of the school, if it's not also the heartbeat of our church, we're missing the mark. And so some things that you can think about is volunteer. Church, or the school has all sorts of under-volunteered, resourced opportunities. They're trying to do really good things to help these students. What happens if we encouraged our people to be the number one volunteers in the activities that the school is doing? Offer to clean up after the bleachers after games, host a free lunch for students, volunteer to coach, start after school programs, help direct, volunteer to direct the school plays. I mean, you've got people in your church with gifts and abilities that can really be a blessing to the local school. Yeah. Any other comments on schools?
FCA is a huge opportunity for us on the East Coast.
Fellowship Christian Athletes.
Yeah, that's what we had an opportunity to help establish an FCA program in middle school, and that's been unreal for us. So
That's awesome.
FCA is a fantastic platform.
Yeah. Another suggestion that we got from a rural community is the music director at this particular church would give music lessons to kids, like after school music lessons. He'd do it free of charge, but it was a great way for him to connect with the music teacher at the school. And if there was kids that needed particular one-on-one help with their instrument or whatever, he would offer that service as a way to bless the school.
If you have a family pastor or a student pastor, have them become licensed as a substitute teacher. Even doing that once a month will get you in the door to just be able to talk to the administration, have key focuses to be able to know students. If you host events, now the parents know, oh, it's Mr. So-and-so who's hosting the event in the church. You're then background checked with the school, and they know that you're background checked.
Another great opportunity, and I absolutely 100% agree with you, another great opportunity is to substitute bus drive. There's such a need for that, and it's a great way. All the kids will know you. What a great connection. And it doesn't take much time. It's a huge need. So
I'd be careful though, because I've also seen youth pastors do that too much.
True.
They enjoy being with the students so much and in the school so much that they lost value in their church because they were doing too much in the school.
That's right. Good. going to go through a couple more here just very quickly because they're self-explanatory. If you want to read a little more about them, again, you can do that in this document. Number 4 is this: be offensive, but not that kind of offensive. What I mean by that is don't play defense. Go on offense. Go on offense. What does that mean? That means target specific needs in your community and do something about them. Don't just, if you're spending all your time counseling broken marriages instead of just playing defense and trying to put the pieces back together out after the marriages are broken, what would it look like to put on free marriage classes for the community that aren't necessarily connected to the church? Do them at the through the community center or through the Chamber of Commerce or something like that, just as a blessing to the community. Go on offense. Grief share is another example of this. Addiction support groups, car maintenance for single moms, a food pantry or a clothing closet, skills classes like canning, cooking, painting, those kinds of things. What would it look like to actually go on offense and meet felt needs within the community? Number 5, quickly, is bust out of that Sunday morning box. What do we mean by that? Well, what would it look like if your church was offering opportunities outside of Sunday morning? Many rural communities are linked in with oil and coal mining, shift work, steel mills, this kind of thing, where a lot of people will work 4 days on, 4 days off, or odd schedules, or their hours will be goofy. We have a women's prison in our county, and they work like a week of day shift and then like 4 days of night shift or something like that. And if their schedule works out, it might be 3 or 4 weeks before they can actually come to church on a Sunday morning. What kind of opportunities do we have with people in my county as well? During calving season, in the late spring or late winter, early spring, there's ranchers that we won't see for a month because their primary income source is being born, and that's not taking into consideration that they need to be in church on Sunday. So they're just gone. What opportunities do we have? So this might mean looking into a midweek service. This might mean looking at a Saturday service. If you aren't posting messages and sermons online, you might consider doing that. Not as a flashy thing, hey, look, because I'm a great communicator, you need to watch me. For those people that can't get to church and might not be able to make it there for 3 or 4 weeks because of their crazy schedules, bust out of the Sunday morning box. Number 6 is simply be a regular somewhere. That means there's value in going to the same coffee shop at the same time, interacting with the same people. Be a regular there. Why? Again, remember, we're talking about evangelism not being an event, but being a process. The more time that you spend with people, the more opportunities that you're going to have to engage in meaningful conversations. One day when you just show up at the coffee shop, you aren't going to have planned it, but that person's going to be going through a difficult time in their life, and you're going to be there to put your hand on their shoulder and pray for them. And that's going to be more to them because they know you've been meeting with them every Tuesday, and it's almost by accident. That's just the way that the Lord works. So be a regular for somewhere and encourage your people to do the same thing. Be a regular. Number 7, take your hobby out of the lobby. Meaning we can make church our hobby and all of our time and all of our energy is spent there. What would it look like to take up a hobby where you are connecting with other people around something that you commonly enjoy? Fishing, hunting, gun club, rodeo. It might not even be something that you're skilled at yet. That's even better. Because then you can go in as a student saying, hey man, I would love it if you could teach me how to fly fish. I've always wanted to learn. And then you're engaging with that person around something that they are passionate about. What a great way to start a relationship with people that you don't know, right? Around something. My hobby is remote control flying. I love building airplanes and flying them with people, and it's just a great opportunity to meet people around something that we're having fun doing. It's a natural way to have interesting conversations with people and build relationships. Number 8, like a good neighbor, and that's just the idea that the people that live closest to us, that are right next door, that live across the street, we need to be good neighbors with them. We need to know their names. We need to spend more time in the front yard than in the backyard so that we have more natural opportunities to connect with them. A great resource for this is the Art of Neighboring book. If you haven't read that, that's a great resource. Bonus, it makes a great teaching series at your church to teach through this book called The Art of Neighboring. We need to teach people to do that. And then number 9 is to turn your wow factor up to 11 on something. There's a stigma, especially in rural church, that it's good enough for the church, which usually means clip art on your advertisements, usually means poorly developed church services where people are throwing music together 2 minutes before the service and people aren't prepared. What would it look like if we turned our wow factor up to 11 to where, not to put on a show, but so that people's expectations of whatever event that we're inviting them to, whether it's our church service or some way that we're serving the community, what would it look like if whatever expectation they had, we just went way above and beyond? So our VBS wasn't just something that their kids endured, but their kids went home and they were like, I can't wait to go back tomorrow. Like what would that look like? So with that, we have a couple minutes left. Any comments on any of these particular?
I have a big question.
Okay.
It's something our church is wrestling with, so it's an open thing. Our church is 100, they want to hit 150, and I'm like, well, what are the 50 people that we're going to have come into our church going to do? What does it look like for them to be part of our church outside of coming to the Sunday service? So I have no idea what that looks like.
So the question is, what opportunities do we have for people to serve?
You're all in rural communities.
Yeah.
Your churches have probably been around for 100 plus years. There's already a litany of who's in charge, who has ownership, who's the boss. Like, well, what does that mean for the new people that come in, have gifts of leadership, have gifts of doing? How do you invite those people in, especially the ones that aren't necessarily the ones who are going to push themselves in?
Yeah. I mean, I'll open that up to the floor if anybody wants to jump in.
That's an opportunity for you to take those established people and turn them into trainers. Where, that person who's always done tech, maybe you say, hey, I want you to find the next tech person. And then I don't care, who it is, but you grab that new person and you make them your disciple. And that's a growth opportunity where now you as the pastor, you're working with the, raising everyone up a notch. And then you'll find different places for them to serve. Because I know I've been a part of churches where it's oh no, he does this. He's been the janitor for years. You don't bother him, but the second he's gone, it's wait, who has a 40-year history of the church? The guy in the coffin. So I think there's value in that transference.
Yeah, and it might be an opportunity to start some new things. I mean, what would it look like to start a new initiative, a new emphasis, a new project, and either take some of the people that are in existing ministries and see if you can find something that they're passionate about, that they can really move in a new direction, which leaves a spot for somebody to come in behind and to take over what they're leaving. I don't know that it's an easy answer to what you're asking, but why wouldn't the church get excited about more people serving in their sweet spot in ministry? I mean, I think that's what we're all shooting for, is to find what people are passionate about and to resource them to serve to their full potential.
Look at your structure, church structure too, to see if there's what kinds of things are prohibitive of a new person coming into some ministry position. Maybe your bylaws state that you can't do certain things.
Yeah.
How firm do you want to hold up all of that?
I'm looking for specifics and not hypotheticals, because I got 20 different hypotheticals for me already floating around, but I've got about 5 couples that have been there for about 5 years, and they still feel like they're the outcasts. Like they're involved in different places, but they still feel like they're not part of the church.
Are you doing do you have a small group ministry?
We've got Sunday school. They've done small groups before. We're talking about putting that back in. But these guys, some of them are on boards, and then the leadership board still says that they're not engaged in the church. They're on the other boards, and I'm trying to figure out how to tangibly, like realistically, help transition church people who've been there for 10, 20 pastors, where I'm going to be the new guy for the next 25 years.
Right.
So how am I going to help the other people who aren't pastors, who don't have like an official place of, all right, I'm established, I'm the new guy, I'm the pastor though.
Yeah.
How do the people who don't have that authority?
Let's talk about that after the session is over. And if you guys have some, practical stuff for him, I'd love to have you in on that conversation. Good. We have just another minute left. Is there any other comments?
Just to develop on your emphasis on evangelism as a process and not just an event, we're trying to think about evangelism as connected not just to the moment of decision of the cross, but to the life of discipleship, everything to the right side of your line. Because the Great Commission calls us to make disciples and not just people who sign the decision card.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Something that we're experimenting with in our own church, but also in our district right now. I think there's a big vision for bivocational ministry in rural church planting that gives the pastor a lot of street credibility. That's something that we're experiencing. That comes with a whole lot of struggles and hurdles, but that's something that we're starting to see in our district, maybe actually encouraging it.
There are benefits of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely there are. We can't be married to a model.
Ty, are you bivocational?
No, I'm not.
Okay. How does that work in a town of 1,200?
We launched well-funded. So we launched with basically a year's worth of operating expenses in the bank. So we didn't have to worry about that. And the process then over the next, that was a 3-year funding from outside sources. We had 3 years of commitments of outside sources for funding, which gave us the leeway to ramp up for the church to take on more and more of the financial responsibility. But what we found was after a year, we were self-supporting, which is awesome. It's great. I know that's not everybody's story. I get that. But it is helpful to go in, especially at the beginning of a church plant, with good financial backing. I would say that 3 years at least. And even if it's stepped down, like 100% for the first year and then steps down to 75 and then 50 or something like that over the next 3 years. Because during that first 3 years, those are the most critical time when you want that church planter to not have his focus divided. And then after that, if he needs to take on a part-time job or to supplement the income or something along those lines, you can reevaluate as you go. But to go in with a 3-year goal, I think is helpful.
So Ty won't say this, but when you were starting up raising your funds, you had a couple of miraculous gifts out of nowhere. People that didn't really know you had just heard about you, gave a big chunk of change, I don't know, 10 grand or whatever, and
one of them was 20,000.
Yeah, 20,000. So it was about a year into it, right? And you got another one of these miraculous gifts. Was that 10 or was that 20?
No, it was 20. And yeah, about a year in, I had another phone call of a guy that wanted to donate 20,000.
So he talked to his board about it, and they just were so overwhelmed with God's blessing that they took that 20,000 and gave it to another church plant to help them in their startup, to give them a miraculous gift. And so I think God honors that kind of generosity. Right from the get-go, you were setting the culture of your church is that, hey, when God blesses us, we bless others. And not a lot of church planters would have done that. They would have grabbed onto it. And
You would have, because the reason that we did that is because I woke up in the middle of the night with a dream, and the Lord spoke to me in this dream that money that was given was not for us. It was for us to give away. So yeah, I had wrestling. Don't think that it was all like I woke up and the first thing I did was I told my wife about this dream that I had, and the reason I did that was because if I let it simmer for too long, I would have said, no, I just had too much pizza last night or something, and that had crazy thoughts like I can't trust this. But I knew that the Lord had spoken to me in this dream. Only time it's ever happened, hasn't happened since, but that was the story about it. So it's not because I was a great person, it's because God spoke to me. I mean, it was the only reason. So yeah. I'll be sticking around if you guys have any other questions, comments. Thanks for being here. Can I pray for you? Lord, I want to thank you for this time together. I want to thank you for these men and women who are investing their lives into seemingly forgotten places in our country. I pray, Lord, that a generation from now, we will see dark places brought to light. We'll see forgotten places brought into revival, that there would be a sweeping across our nation of people turning to you in places that have been overlooked and forgotten. Lord, would you raise up young men and women from these rural communities that are going to invest their lives in seeing the kingdom brought to those places. And so, Lord, we commit it to you. It's in your hands, and we pray that we would be faithful stewards to do what we can do. We'll follow you each step of the way in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you guys for being here.